targets for water supply and sanitation. Indeed, during the 6th World Water Forum in Marseille in March 2012, the United Nations declared that the Millennium Development Goal target on drinking water had been reached 5 years ahead of schedule. We should congratulate member states for achieving that target. However, we must also recognize that in the area of sanitation, pollution control, and water resources management, there's still a huge challenge ahead. It is commonplace to read about the water crisis, and events in some parts of the world reinforced it. At the personal level, I know too well, given the current situation of northeast Brazil and southeast Brazil. If we continue to undermine the sustainability of our water resources, we will also undermine our economic growth, our ecosystems, and our very society. Not to mention the implications for water under a climate change, where it is clear that climate variability will amplify the extremes in the water crisis. I strongly believe that water resources development and management is the first-line defense in our struggle to cope with climate variability and change. However, while the international climate negotiations have always focused on energy and mitigation, water is at the heart of adaptation and resilience. It is essential that the global community and national governments recognize and act on this fact now. Back in 2012, the World Water Council launched at the UN General Assembly a call for member states to sign a pact for water security. Now is the time to have this concept at the highest possible profile within the context of the post-2015 development agenda. This could be achieved through a dedicated water goal and a series of interconnected goals, especially those related to food, energy, cities, climate, disasters, sustainable consumption and production, health, and ecosystems. Water is seen by many as a problem that requires great investment, which economic benefits are not always accrued at short range. Elements of this may be true, but we do not challenge this perspective water, then our success may be limited. By investing in water now and by creating genuine shared responsibility, we have the potential to recast water as a real opportunity for our economy, society, and environment, the three pillars of sustainable development. Ladies and gentlemen, as the dialogue and negotiations are ongoing, the World Water Council encourages all its members and partners to engage, collaborate, and contribute to the recognition of a water goal. Today, we consider the complex linkages between water and critical areas such as human health, food and energy security, urbanization, industrial growth, and climate change. However, I would suggest that beyond this debate, we would need to keep an eye on the stepping stones that will define our future sustainable development goals. Much attention has been focused on the United Nations General Assembly meeting in September and the COP21 meeting in Paris in December. These are significant moments in our history for the water community. That said, we should not lose the sight of other important steps in this roadway. The high-level political forum will meet in New York in June. This body will be responsible for overseeing the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals, an issue that is vital for all of us. In July, the third International Conference on Development Financing will take place in Addis Ababa. This is where some of the hard decisions will be taken about how we will financially support our global ambitions. Finally, I would like to flag the G20 meeting in November, where world leaders will continue to push for the global agenda for economic growth. This will be a very busy year, and we need to maintain the momentum for a water goal. We need to focus on how we will pay for it, how we will implement it, how it makes a contribution to global economic growth, and how it will be impacted by climate change. I am confident that the water community is up to this challenge. I would like to thank the speakers and the panelists participating in this panel today, as I know they will share with us meaningful ideas and actions that will help us to reach this water goal. Finally, it is for me a great honor and pleasure to introduce to you our esteemed opening speaker for this session. She is easily one of the most recognizable members of our global water community. Without any further ado, please join me to welcome Minister of Infrastructure and Environment of the Netherlands, Mrs. Melanie Schultz van Hagen. Minister.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, today we are discussing a crucial topic. What position should water occupy in our future development plans? And more importantly, why? And to illustrate the urgency I feel, I want to introduce you to two ordinary citizens. And the first one is Mr. Patrick Angkon. He's a 67-year-old man, and he lives in a town close to the Malaysian city of Kuching. And 2 months ago, the city, his town, was flooded after heavy rainfall, and Mr. Angkon only managed to rescue his sofa, his television, and his refrigerator. And there had been floodings in his neighborhood in the past, but only in the last couple of years it became worse and worse, and this was because of the town's rapid expansion. Many new houses were built, but no new drainage system. So it couldn't cope with the heavy rainfall of the past few years. And Mr. Angkon's story shows us that adequate water infrastructure is crucial for urban and economic development. It can both prevent damage and foster local development. But often this is not a political priority. And I can say this as a politician, that politicians most of the time have other priorities than investing in water infrastructure. Certainly when the infrastructure is underground and you can't see it. So this is a real problem. And we should think how we could convince political leaders to do so. Because in the end, Mr. Angkon lost all he had. And this is very important that we should prevent from that. And the second person I'd like to introduce is Berita. She's a mother of 5 in a small village in Malawi. And also 2 months ago, she was at home asleep together with her husband and her 5 children when water from the nearby river flooded the village. And luckily, her husband woke her up and the family survived by climbing a tree. And for the next 2 weeks, their village was literally an island. And the family's cornfield, the source of their food and income, was underwater. And Berita and her husband gave refuge to relatives who lost their homes in the floods, 13 people living together in a house with only 1 bedroom. And there was another problem. Berita was pregnant, 9 months pregnant. So luckily, her little baby girl was born healthy. But she was born under the threat of flooding, and she faces an urgent shortage of clean water and sanitation. So, ladies and gentlemen, in the same week that Berita's baby was born, the World Economic Forum convened in Switzerland. And it was there that political and business leaders concluded for the first time that water was the most serious risk facing the world. But at the same time, water is essential for future development. And that was, I feel, a major breakthrough. Yet it received very little media attention. Even in my own country, a nation that has been living and struggling with water for over 800 years, there was no public debate about this issue. So this issue, the issue of water, is still invisible, and this is also something we should do something about, and we should discuss later on in the panel. What can we do about that? So all of us here share the same sense of urgency about water-related issues, but there is still a lot of work to be done outside of this conference room. Citizens, entrepreneurs, CEOs, political leaders also need persuading. And the stories of real people can help us do that. Because they show exactly what the new Sustainable Development Goals are all about. At the moment, we're spending a huge amount of time and efforts negotiating the number of goals and the exact wording of the targets and the sub-targets. A process that can make us see these goals as ends in themselves, and clearly they are not. We need to remind ourselves why we need them, and to do that, you only have to think about the situation of Berita and Mr. Ancon. Like all of us, they want to live in safety, they want to live in prosperity. That's our goal, the creation of increasingly resilient communities who are prepared for disasters. So, ladies and gentlemen, water connects all development goals, as Mr. Braga was also saying. Because without water, there will be no development at all. That's why the Netherlands strongly supports a dedicated SDG on water and reduction of disaster risks through the SDG on human settlements, also important. And we should resist the temptation to treat the SDGs as a checklist we can simply tick off. Instead, they should be translated into concrete projects that help us reach them. And that's exactly what this World Water Forum is about, implementation. It's time to act. First, improving water governance worldwide. Second, improving water financing worldwide. And third, defining practical projects that will help us advance in a practical way. So, how does the Netherlands contribute? In all of this, the Netherlands is committed to play its part. We have experienced the urgency of water issues for more than 800 years. We have translated this into an approach that combines water security, urban and spatial development in one integrated program, in one law, which we decided on last year, the Delta Law, and financed by a special government fund, a Delta Fund, a fund which has money until the year 2050. So we can invest for the coming years in water security, in spatial planning. And for us, the sense of urgency about water issues is obvious, and we know that other Delta countries feel the same way. So at the UN conference on disaster risk reduction held in Japan last month, my government proposed setting up a worldwide Delta coalition. In this coalition, we want to share solutions and projects with other river deltas and add value to each other's safety and development programs. We want to share our knowledge, but more importantly, we want to get down to work. And I'm delighted that 6 other countries have already joined this coalition: Colombia, France, Japan, Korea, the Philippines, and Vietnam. And I look forward to welcoming more of you, more countries that are coming from a Delta, in this Delta coalition. Well, ladies and gentlemen, without enough clean water and sanitation and without flood protection, Benita and Mr. Ancon will not have a sustainable future. Here at the World Water Forum, we may easily agree on that. But there's a lot of work to be done to persuade others and to include business world into our search for leadership, action and finance. And this panel, I think, is an excellent opportunity to share ideas, to share plans, to increase the sense of urgency, both in our own societies and worldwide. And I'm looking forward to hear your ideas and your plans for actions. Because after the agreement on the SDGs in September, we should be prepared for action. More than anything, driven by the need to live in safety and prosperity. Thank you very much.
여러분 안녕하십니까? Mabibi na mabwana hamjambo. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the second of my greetings was in Kiswahili, which speaks to the fact that I come from Nairobi, Kenya. I am a broadcast journalist My name is John Sibiokumu, and the relationship that I have with the Swiss Development Corporation is that we've worked together before from where I come from. So I'm very glad that they've invited me to moderate this particular session. I would like, first of all, to define our terms. Our terms are such, instead of having two moderators, rather, instead of having one moderator, you're going to have two. And for that, let me show you my co-moderator. Here she is. This is Karen Krishnak. She comes from the United States of America, and we met yesterday, and we've decided that we love each other already. Karen is here to help me because I admitted from the outset that I'm not very IT savvy, and there was a technical quotient to this debate, which is going to take Twitter feeds as well as questions from the floor, and this is where she will come in. Again, Karen, being an environmental lawyer and having worked for the Nature Conservancy in the US, is a dyed-in-the-wool professional. So anything that I don't know, which represents a lay perception, she will immediately cover up, and we'll all end up looking very good. So this is the kind of thinking that we've had. So Karen, thank you. And for me, what does it represent for me, this idea of sustainable development? I've read about your Brundtland commissions, the definition of sustainable development as development that needs to address the needs of the present and to be so vibrant and active that it represents the needs and aspirations of future generations. The idea of water as the key of life, again, needs no elaboration. And the idea of sustainable development goals to which we're working towards, I spoke to the people who are talking about this panel, and also from Minister Van Hagen for saying that people need to be convinced. So for my panel, I'm going to be needling you, I'm going to be making your life uncomfortable by saying, why do we need to be convinced? Why can't we just go home and adopt all these measures? So there must be challenges. It seems to me that there must be challenges. So, another thing that I managed to do, and that is because, again, from past experience, I knew full well that this is a very high-powered delegation, a very high-powered panel, and I said to myself, if we stand on hierarchy and rank, I am going to be confused because I won't know whom to address next, in what manner, whether I need to bow, whether I need to curtsy. So I settled for alphabetical order. It's easy, isn't it? And my panel was very obliging, and thank you for being obliging in that manner. So there is a B, and this is where I say, for all those hours of preparation, this is where it comes in. I'm going to look here, and I'm going to see a B, and that B represents Kirsten Brøsbøl, who is the Minister of the Environment for Denmark. Got it. So it started well. Next to her, I was told that whatever I saw on paper, I had to reverse because, in fact, the last name came first. So it is Mr. Jae-kyoung, who is the CEO of the Korean Water Resources Corporation, K-Water. Alors, à côté de lui, je peux me présenter en français parce que c'est quand même un frère, c'est Monsieur Michel Jarraud. Michel Jarraud, who is the head of UN Water. Is that correct? Oh.
I think so.
Right. Next to Michel, we have a lady from Ecuador, and she is one of the two Ks. There's one K and there's K2. The first K is Yolanda Kakabadze. She is the president of WWF, and W stands for World, W stands for Wide, and F stands for Fund. Next, habari ndugu, njema tumekutana tena. We can talk Swahili with him because this is Mr. Donald Kasongi Donald Kasongi comes from a city in Tanzania called Mwanza, and he is a Secretary General of the Nile Delta Discourse, Basin. Nile Basin Discourse, the countries that surround the River Nile, where you're sure you know more about this than I do, transboundary, lots of countries, one river, lots of desires about the usage of the water therefrom. Minister, I've just come from your country 2 months ago. It was lovely. I always go to South Africa. Whenever I go to South Africa, I go to the Market Theatre Johannesburg because I love the theatre. I love John Canny, and I always go and see plays because that's where we're all coming from. But so we can discuss the theatre after water. But this is Nomvula Mokonyane, who is the Minister for Water and Sanitation of the Republic of South Africa, a veteran of the struggle. We'll save our applause for all our panel. Thereafter, I have my British cousin. I said to Jack that I started life as a schoolboy in England, therefore the British are my cousins, and the French are my second cousins. Jack Moss. Jack Moss, who is the head of Aquafed. And when I see him, I see the private sector, because you head a private sector alliance with a focus on water. That's what I see in you. And of course, we have met our keynote speaker, but I wish to say her name again because I've practiced it many times, Melanie Schultz van Hagen, who is the Minister for Infrastructure and the Environment, the Netherlands. A very warm round of applause for our panel. There are two more gentlemen whom we're going to meet. I'm going to introduce the first one because I just love saying all these names. It's just so lovely. Our rapporteur, who is a special envoy of the President of Hungary, if you'd be so kind as to rise. And you know him. I only met him this morning at the coffee table. But this should be Andras Soloshinaj. There we go. And we're going to have from the Swiss Development Corporation, a gentleman who's taller than me, as you'll soon find out. Please stand up. This is the Assistant Director, Assistant Director General, Major Director General of the Swiss Development, but his name is Pio Venus. Right. And my name is John. Just stick to John. The rest is too complicated. Sibio Kumu is the rest. Right, folks. We're in for the long haul. We have to know and love each other. We're here for, on my program, this session is going to end at noon. It's going to end at noon. It's going to be divided into 2 bits. There's going to be a short break in between so that you can just sort of get up and flatter and not doze off and collapse in a heap. And then we're going to come back, and there's going to be a second session. We have questions from the floor, and again, the measure of my success, the measure of the success of this session is for you to participate, is for you to ask questions. And I've told my panel not to give speeches, but to give responses. There's a difference. And we'll soon find out who's not playing the game. So we are going to have responses to questions. And we also have, if you have to put a smile on throughout, because if you looked at your little program, this particular session is being fed live. So everybody can see you across the globe. And it's also being transmitted to the conference delegates in Daegu at the World Water Council stand. So in other words, we may look as if nobody's seeing what we're doing, but lots of people are, so beware. Right, here we go. Let's set the ball rolling. Let's set the ball rolling. I'm going to say to our panels, you've heard a speech, you've heard a keynote speech. We shouldn't just let it flow away and disappear. I was listening to the keynote speech, and I made a few bullet points. I'd like to have gut, visceral responses from where you come from, ladies and gentlemen, from your constituencies. What did you take away from that keynote speech? Is it stuff that you've heard before and you're hearing for the 100th time and you don't care? Or if you do care, why do you care? And because we're dividing people into not hierarchy but to areas of concern, I'm going to start with my own continent, out of selfishness. And I'm going to say to you, Minister Mokonyane, how did you respond to that keynote speech?
3 things came out of the speech. Amongst others, the story of the two speaks about creation of equality as well as promotion of dignity across racial lines, across gender, because there's a Mrs. So-and-so and there's a Mr. So-and-so, which then also speaks about putting the human face in everything that we're doing. The second thing, it's about the institutional arrangements that have to govern the realization of the SDG itself. That globally, we need to pool our resources together. We need strong partnerships. We need government, we need the public sector, we need the private sector, we need civil society, and we can only succeed through a knowledge-based intervention. Therefore, research and development becomes very key, so that then our solutions are informed on the basis of the data that we have and on the basis of the statistics and the baseline that we'll all be starting from. And then the last one, it's around financing. That in everything that we do, we must make sure that water infrastructure and sanitation is funded as an enabler for economic growth as well as a solution towards social prosperity.
Thank you. Mr. Kasongi, obviously we can't repeat the same things, but I would say to you that the SDGs are a follow-up paradigm from the MDGs. And there's already been a measure of success there and a cause for self-congratulation. From your particular concern, what do you take away as a priority for you from the keynote speech?
From what we have learned through the MDGs, this transition leads us to the SDGs. But I think it's important to underline about the framework for partnerships. I think we need to redefine the partnerships. Secondly, there are 3 issues that were underlined: governance, financing, and the practical projects. And I think governance should not be government. Always we end up talking about governments when you are talking about governance. But I think should be broader, talking to the citizens, the people who are mostly affected by the water crisis we are talking about. So water security should be about much more about governance, and governance should be inclusive. Let's all agree on how we together set the norms, the rules on how we will manage the water within our territorial boundaries, but with our transboundary waters. How do we engage the people? Are the citizens part of the formula, part of the discussion that we are talking about in governance? So for me, as we move into the SDGs, we really need to make sure that governance takes into account the citizens who are the people that we represent.
Mr. Jae,
yes,
our host, in some measure, reading about you and this whole region, devastation that went so many years before, you've managed to create an environment where wild animals have returned to streams, where the water is pure. So is that for you, are you saying that the keynote speech did nothing for you because you've done it already? Korea has succeeded.
Yeah, but she just focus for the importance of the safety or kind of some like risk reduction. But I have some experience to have some kind of the governance to like rehabilitation of the streams or rivers. But it is necessary to have some more focus for the safety issue as well as some sustainability. So that is going to be related to her keynote speech. So that's, I'm going to, talk about that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Already I'm sensing different priorities for different folks, which makes sense. So is there going to be a synthesis? Is there going to be a synergy by the time we've finished? I'm going to go to Denmark and say to you a similar question. Again, the developed world, have you done it already? Therefore, this is a problem for other people. I'm interested in this idea of universality, that this concerns us all, because the MDGs seem to point targets at certain people. Universal? Are you convinced beyond the rhetoric of a politician?
I believe the universality of the SDGs is very central. And the fact that climate change is affecting us all, the consequences of climate change is affecting us all. And we've been discussing for the last couple of days the importance of linking climate change to the challenges of water, and the fact that water runs through everything, including dealing with climate change. And for Denmark, I mean, we don't have big deltas, but we are lowland and part island state. We'll be experiencing the consequences of rising sea levels. We've experienced frequently occurring storms, floodings, heavy rainfalls. So we are dealing with consequences of climate change as well. And I think what Melanie did with her speech is precisely what we need to do. Put the human face, as we also heard before, put the human face on the consequences of climate change and the consequences of not managing our water resources. I think that is key also to speaking to a broader audience than who are in this room, who are already, I assume, convinced that water is important. I think that's what we need to do as politicians, as private sector, all of us dealing with these issues. So well done, Melanie. I think we should all remember that. I want to also mention the fact that maybe we all in this room also agree that an SDG on water is important and that water should run through everything. But we need to keep momentum up until September. We need to be present in New York. We need to make sure that we have people in New York who know what they're talking about, and to make sure that we have the expertise there to make sure that what is on the table now stays on the table, and that we maintain the balance which are now in the proposed SDGs.
I'm going to turn to you, Mr. Moss, and I saw on your face the private